Brad, how you doing? Welcome to the Bitcoin Source. Can we kick things off by introducing yourself?
Pleasure to be here with you, Dado. Thanks so much for having me. My name's Brad Van Voorhees. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol. Just to give you a little bit of background on myself before we dive into the mechanics of how Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol works. I've spent my entire career in sustainability, specifically over the last 9 years before founding Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol. I built the sustainability department for a New York Stock Exchange listed Fortune 200. We built that department from around 3 employees to around 140 globally, and I led all of our APAC and EMEA operations based out of Asia. And specifically, I focused on things like renewable energy feasibility studies, resource efficiency within partners that we have around the world, and our non-US government engagement. So meeting with governments around the world to talk about both social and environmental sustainability.
Thank you for that introduction. That was great. Before we get into the mechanics of sustainable, I always try to ask my guests, like, where did they source their Bitcoin knowledge, whether it was books, courses, conferences, or even people in the space or the ecosystem that might have inspired you. So could you kind of give the audience a breakdown of any of those things that kind of helped you to become a better Bitcoiner?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure like many of us, Twitter has been one of my go-to sources. I just love to learn. And when I got into Bitcoin, I just started following every single Bitcoiner I could, and not just Bitcoiners, to be honest. I wouldn't call myself a Bitcoin maximalist per se, but I deeply, deeply believe in Bitcoin. But that said, I like technology. And so, not only do I follow sort of pure Bitcoiners, if you will, but I also follow venture capital funds, different founders, and I just follow sort of anyone that I can learn from. And I'm not a big tweeter per se. I'm more of an absorber. I like to absorb knowledge. So Twitter, of course, The Bitcoin Standard was a book that I really enjoyed. Learning the history of stores of value and currency was really eye-opening to me. And then I think also there's been a number of friends in my life, who've pushed me to learn more about Bitcoin. In particular, a friend who's a crypto trader based in Taipei, Taiwan. And so sort of 2018, he was a big influence on me to dive in and learn more.
I love to hear people kind of talk about how they were orange pilled and started on their Bitcoin journey. So let's try to get into sustainable as a company. I've really been following the company. Like, I wrote an article about it, and I talked to Elliot David about the company, and I just found it so profound, so different. It's really going to change the narrative of climate, renewable energy in regards to Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. So the first question I want to kind of get into is the Inflation Reduction Act, which was just recently passed by Biden. Could you kind of break down how that will impact your company using Bitcoin as a form of renewable energy?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, really, I think about Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol as it's a climate tech company that happens to use Bitcoin as an anchor to drive development of renewable energy. Of course, our objective, our mission is to make Bitcoin our planet's most powerful climate positive asset. We think this is a really important mission. I think historically there's a fairly negative connotation surrounding Bitcoin because of its illicit uses in the past. And now, of course, the concerns around environmental issues. And so, I think that it's really important for Bitcoin and the ecosystem, not just to be sort of carbon neutral, but to actually go a step further and be climate positive. So that's our mission. Now, to answer your question a bit more directly, when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, the only thing I've heard so far that may have some sort of impact on the ecosystem, and I should caveat all this by saying I haven't dug into the Inflation Reduction Act in depth at this point, although after this podcast, certainly I will. But one of the things I did notice was that there is some funding earmarked for methane mitigation or methane reduction. So I think perhaps that could have an impact on Bitcoin miners that are using waste gas. But let's see. I think what may over the long term be more impactful for our business from a regulatory landscape perspective is the MiCA proposal in Europe. It's obviously it's going to be a couple of years before it's enacted, but I think that there's going to be provisions in there that stipulate, that at least within Europe, Bitcoin miners need to be using clean energy, or I should say proof of work miners at large need to be using clean energy, and surely it's going to need to be verified. So we hope to stay ahead of the curve there. We're of course speaking with, various consultants and advisors in Europe, helping to guide us along the way. And it's our objective to help miners and also investors across Europe get ahead of that curve. Make sure that they're prepared for however that regulatory landscape pans out, and maybe even we could have an influence on that regulatory landscape, because we're helping the ecosystem sort of move ahead of what they want to regulate.
Yeah, and I know there's like a large allocation. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's somewhere in billions where just for climate research, climate change procedures, this Reduction Act bill will kind of be really fostering and pushing that up to a higher standard. So my hopes is that Sustainable, get some of that funding. People kind of can use this to try to dispel some of the FUD that we're seeing, that's been ubiquitous around the energy space in regards to Bitcoin. I want to really get into not really numbers, but just more about the company as far from an investment perspective. So, SBP will create a path for institutional asset managers to put a sustainable asset on their Bitcoin mining. So how can you as a CEO, you as a founder, how do you kind of help your clients say this asset is sustainable? Like what procedures, protocol does Sustainable do to allow that to happen?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, really, I think about Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol as it's a climate tech company that happens to use Bitcoin as an anchor to drive development of renewable energy. Of course, our mission is to make Bitcoin our planet's most powerful climate positive asset. We think this is a really important mission. I think historically there's a fairly negative connotation surrounding Bitcoin because of its illicit uses in the past. And now, of course, the concerns around environmental issues. And so, I think that it's really important for Bitcoin and the ecosystem not just to be sort of carbon neutral, but to actually go a step further and be climate positive. So that's our mission. Now, to answer your question a bit more directly, when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, the only thing I've heard so far that may have some sort of impact on the ecosystem, and I should caveat all this by saying I haven't dug into the Inflation Reduction Act in depth at this point, although after this podcast, certainly I will. But one of the things I did notice was that there is some funding earmarked for methane mitigation or methane reduction. So I think perhaps that could have an impact on Bitcoin miners that are using waste gas. But let's see. I think what may over the long term be more impactful for our business from a regulatory landscape perspective is the MiCA proposal in Europe. It's obviously it's going to be a couple of years before it's enacted, but I think that there's going to be provisions in there that stipulate, that at least within Europe, Bitcoin miners need to be using clean energy, or I should say proof of work miners at large need to be using clean energy, and surely it's going to need to be verified. So we hope to stay ahead of the curve there. We're of course speaking with, various consultants and advisors in Europe, helping to guide us along the way. and it's our objective to help miners and also investors across Europe get ahead of that curve. Make sure that they're prepared for however that regulatory landscape pans out, and maybe even we could have an influence on that regulatory landscape. Because we're helping the ecosystem sort of move ahead of what they want to regulate.
Yeah, and I absolutely love this company. I think that it's so forward thinking. I've seen other energy companies that are trying to do the renewable stuff for Bitcoin, and I don't see this level of sophistication. I don't see this level of adroit ability to kind of really get in and really get past just the mining protocol, but just getting into the science of what it takes to make not only the 2 million that's left, but the 19 million that's still out there right now. How do we make that renewable, sustainable, and effective for our climate?
Yeah, sure. So there are a couple components of what we're building. And, I think one thing to note is that, we're not just trying to help investors have sustainable Bitcoin. We actually, want to allow them to hold Bitcoin and hold it in a way that is climate positive. So it's beyond just sustainable. It's actually helping to drive additional renewable energy development or helping to mitigate CO2 equivalents from entering the atmosphere. And so, the way that we go about that is first and foremost, it's working with miners who are using clean energy sources, whether that is, from the grid and they're buying the appropriate EACs or energy attribute certificates, whether those are RECs or, bundled or unbundled RECs, PPAs, whatever it may be, we will verify that they are indeed, purchasing renewable energy. In fact, we have a partner that will do the verification for us. It's very granular verification, and likely will be the most robust data set available pertaining to renewable energy use by Bitcoin miners. Secondly, within the protocol, we'll also include Bitcoin miners that are meeting a certain standard of mitigating CO2 equivalents from entering the atmosphere. This could be miners that are using waste methane that is derived from a garbage landfill, or it could be miners that are using waste gas from the waste gas from the oil and gas sector. And of course, we have some standards that we are applying to this. If the well is not producing anything but this waste gas, then we don't include that. But if the waste gas from the well is a very small percentage of the revenue that's not actually perpetuating the oil and gas sector, and in fact it's just helping to mitigate CO2 equivalents from entering the atmosphere, then we'll include that. So that's at the sort of base level of what we're doing. And the idea behind this is that we want to financially incentivize miners to use renewable or clean energy sources. And we believe that, through this financial incentive, we can actually drive behavioral change of the network, or of miners within the network, I should say. If a miner has a choice between two different energy sources, and they're almost at parity in terms of cost, one of them is renewable, the other's not, and then all of a sudden they're getting, beyond the Bitcoin that they mine, they're also getting rewarded for the use of clean energy. We believe that this process will drive behavioral change. So that's at the mining level. Now, of course, we've already surpassed, or I should say the network has already surpassed the 19 million mark in terms of Bitcoin that were mined, and we now have sub 2 million left. So the lion's share of Bitcoin has already been mined, from 2009 until, we crossed that 19 million mark just a few months ago. And so the question then is, how do you address the Bitcoin that were already mined? And so there we have a pretty unique process where we tie the sustainability of the existing Bitcoin directly to renewable energy development. And so investors who are going to basically add, proof of sustainable mining, or by way of our product, the Sustainable Bitcoin Certificate, or SBC, they now have an opportunity to actually as we address the existing 19 million Bitcoin, they have this unique opportunity to drive capital into renewable energy development. Now, why I think this is unique and interesting is that, if for example, there was an ETF that was a climate positive spot Bitcoin ETF, or perhaps, since who knows when we'll ever get a spot Bitcoin ETF in the US, maybe we should talk about a spot Bitcoin ETP in Europe. So the concept here would be that, it's a spot Bitcoin ETP coupled with our product, the Sustainable Bitcoin Certificate, one SBC for each Bitcoin in the fund. And effectively, as this fund grows and more of the SBCs need to be issued, what the SBC is doing is creating basically a path through that capital from these ETPs or ETFs gets allocated into renewable energy development. I could get into a little bit more detail on it another time, but I think it's a really unique product. I think that everyone wants to participate in Bitcoin. We all know where it's heading. It's an extremely unique asset class. Now, if we can couple that with not just sustainability, but in fact climate positive, climate positive attributes, now that gets really interesting. And it's my hope that we can unlock some of the $50 to $60 trillion that are currently guarded by ESG mandates and have that flow into the Bitcoin network.
Yeah, and I absolutely love this company. I think that it's so forward thinking. I've seen other energy companies that are trying to do the renewable stuff for Bitcoin, and I don't see this level of sophistication. I don't see this level of adroit ability to kind of really get in and really get past just the mining protocol, but just getting into the science of what it takes to make not only the 2 million that's left, but the 19 million that's still out there right now. How do we make that renewable, sustainable, and effective for our climate?
Thanks. I appreciate that, Dado. We've been building this now for nearly 2 years. We'll be coming up on 2 years, sort of at the end of this year. And, the reality is we've been pretty quiet about it so far. We've just been heads down, building, speaking with ETP providers and Bitcoin trackers in Europe and Asia. We've been speaking with funds across the US. We've been partnering with miners. We've been speaking with climate science NGOs and sustainability NGOs. The list goes on. The team my team is incredible. They've been, working around the clock nonstop on this, and we are really just now on the precipice and ready to go. And, I'm really, really happy to say that there's multiple funds now, ETPs and trackers, that we are in discussions with to make climate positive Bitcoin ETP. So, I think when this finally goes live, and certainly it's going to take a little bit more time, when it finally goes live, it's my hope that we add a lot of value to the Bitcoin ecosystem. My personal goal is to change the narrative surrounding Bitcoin's sustainability. I've helped shape narratives for a big corporation pertaining to sustainability, and I love Bitcoin. And I don't believe that it's bad for the environment, or that it has to be. I think it can be good for the environment, and so it's my mission to change that narrative and create something that will actually drive positive environmental impact. So again, I really appreciate your support and belief in what we're doing.
Yeah, I love it. And Brad, I want to kind of get into something that I think a lot of Bitcoiners, especially myself, saw that your company is doing, and I would love for you to really elucidate on, which is, Bitcoin has Satoshis and Sustainable has something called Kyotos. So my question to you is that what inspired you or motivated you to have a 21 million cap for those Kyotos similar to Bitcoin?
Yeah, sure. So the Kyoto is the Sustainable Bitcoin Certificate's equivalent of a SAT, and so the SBC, as we call it, is divisible by 100 million, just like Bitcoin is divisible by 100 million sats. And the reason for that is quite simple. The SBC is intended to be a perfect parallel or mirror to Bitcoin that captures the sustainability attributes, or as we like to say, it allows us to capture proof of sustainable mining. Really, we intended to keep it as simple as possible, in the sense that, an institutional investor, or perhaps one day a retail investor, if they have 10,500 and a half Bitcoin, they can have 10,500 and a half SBC. It's just intended to be a perfect parallel. And, as far as Bitcoin mining goes, once we verify a mine, every time they mine a Bitcoin, we will issue them one sustainable Bitcoin certificate. And then, of course, we plan to issue sustainable Bitcoin certificates retroactively for the existing Bitcoin. And so, we will never produce more than 21 million SBC. In theory, the last SBC would be minted for the last Bitcoin to be mined, or the last piece of Bitcoin to be mined. Now, my belief is that the entire network will be fully sustainable long before the last Bitcoin is mined. And in fact, probably society at large will have completely transitioned away from carbon-derived fuel sources by the time the last Bitcoin is mined. So, our mission is to drive impact today, impact now. And just to sort of wrap it up on your question, the rationale for the Kyoto was just to keep things as simple as possible. Simplicity, from my perspective, is beautiful. It works for people around the world. I sort of ascribe to the Steve Jobs philosophy that most people don't want something technical. They want something really simple, easy to use. And finally, of course, the Kyoto was a tongue-in-cheek, sort of tongue-in-cheek, I suppose, reference to the Kyoto Protocol, which, of course, was a landmark protocol pertaining to environmental sustainability and climate change. And of course, Satoshi, Kyoto, sort of both of them Japanese. So it was just a natural fit. To be honest, we don't even talk about Kyotos that often. I think most of our client base is institutional, and they're not dealing in half Bitcoins; they're dealing in full Bitcoins, and they tend to have thousands of Bitcoin in their funds, not a couple or half. So, anyways, the idea here was that we want to keep it as simple as possible, and I think one day as this gets rolled out and retail starts to use it, the Kyoto perhaps will become a much more commonplace tool for retail investors to purchase and make their Bitcoin climate positive. And in fact, the SBC is in its own right, it's an asset class, and so we believe there's going to be upside appreciation to the SBC, and we can share sort of why we have this belief, but it's tied very closely to the energy consumption of the network.
Yeah, and I thought, like, at first when I read the protocol, read what you guys are doing, I was like, oh, this sounds like bragging rights for incentivizing miners to kind of push clean green energy. And I just remembered, like, when you go to certain buildings or certain skyscrapers, you'll see like this building is renewable, this building has clean green energy, like a little sticker that they put on the window or on the door when you first walk into some of these major corporation buildings. And I started to think about that in regards to mining. I'm like, oh, sustainable is kind of coming in and kind of incentivizing miners to say, like, hey, it's a competitive thing. Like, we're clean, we're renewable, we're sourcing Bitcoin in the right way that's going to help the planet, and you should too. And I think that as other miners see, like, hey, we got the stamp of approval, we have investors that are looking at the ESG mandates and they're kind of giving the green light on this. I think that that's what's going to bolster sustainable in the future to be a next level Bitcoin sustainable mining company. So thank you, Brad, for your foresight and your genius on that.
We today as far as miners go, we're working with really the preeminent Bitcoin miners. When I say preeminent in terms of their vision for sustainability. In particular, I can give a shout out to CleanSpark. Just an amazing company, great group of people, and their vision for what Bitcoin mining can be is really pushing the envelope. They know it can be extremely sustainable. And so, yeah, to your point, I do think that as the protocol starts to take off and we see, that there's a demand from the institutional side, and miners are seeing that their competitors are getting a transparent and verified proof of clean energy use. I think that more and more miners are going to want to come on and do the same. Frankly speaking, I think those that are publicly traded, they want to be they want to be sustainable. It's good for business, right? The street reacts well to businesses that are really sustainable. And then secondly, this is a new revenue source for them. They're able to monetize the sustainability of their business. So I do think you're absolutely correct that more and more miners are going to sort of hop on board when they see the benefits to them at no cost. So it's just purely benefit, purely value add. And again, it's this is our vision. Not just to make miners more money. It's that we believe that A, this is going to be good for the environment, and B, it's going to be great for Bitcoin. And so we can sort of tie it all together there. It's good for Bitcoin miners, it's good for the environment, and it's good for Bitcoin at large.
Genius, absolutely genius. And my last question, Brad, is we've talked about Bitcoin mining, and as we know, there's going to be tons of companies out there scrambling to grab hold of that last 2 million. So my question for you is sustainable, the company as a whole will be a part of the quote unquote mining sector. How will the company combat e-waste or electronic waste in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question and something we will definitely think about and dive into. Now, the reality is that e-waste within Bitcoin mining is a fairly it's a fairly easy issue to deal with. In that, there's around 100,000 new ASICs being produced monthly right now, or being deployed monthly, around 1.2 million annually. Now that the chip shortage is coming to an end, I could imagine that number picks up quite a bit. But relative to many other industries, this is a very small number of units. I don't know off the top of my head how many units of phones that Apple or Samsung or Huawei produce, but I know that it's many hundreds of times more than there are ASICs rigs. So it's a small problem to deal with in the first place. And the reality is that the Bitcoin mining sector, it's still fairly compact, and the manufacturers of ASICs, it's a relatively small cohort. And so, by no means am I trying to sort of skirt around this question or belittle the challenge here. I just think it's something that can be, as an industry, can be dealt with very easily. But that said, finally, there are definitely some amazing companies out there that are taking e-waste and, for example, sort of taking scrapping the raw materials out of it, out of e-waste, and producing important products that we need, like lithium-ion batteries, for cars and other things. So my guess is that, there's going to be a really robust system in place that, allows for sort of circularity of Bitcoin mining machines, of ASICs. When I finally come up for air, which who knows when that's going to be, because we've really been head down building. That is something that I would love to work on. And, frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if, the Bitmains of the world and other mining rig companies, along with some of the bigger players in the mining space, start to work together to create circularity of equipment. And then, of course, as many other Bitcoiners have mentioned in the past, it's not like these rigs are getting steamrolled after 18 months. I mean, this is just some misperception of sort of the speed at which ASICs rigs become obsolete. I'm not sure how that came into sort of popular culture or the mainstream media, but it's simply not true. And when it is time to retire those rigs, I think there's going to be a solid plan in place. And I'd love to help participate in that, because over my career, I have worked on circularity quite a bit. And again, I'd love to help the Bitcoin ecosystem in whatever way I can.
I'm so grateful for you clearing that up, because I think a lot of people that, push the FUD about energy renewal, they kind of like use the e-waste kind of scenario to stump a lot of companies. A lot of people don't know what they're going to do about it, or they're not even familiar about e-waste. When you look at places like Africa, Southeast Asia, you have these huge dumps that literally become cities of people, filtering through waste and cell phones and disregarded computers. So I'm glad that Sustainable has it on their radar. You have an understanding that you realize that e-waste is not as big of a deal as like the mobile computing or the cell phone industry is. And I'm just grateful that you kind of broke that down so that when people watch this episode, they can have a better clarification on what Sustainable is doing and how much of the impact e-waste has in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So thank you for that.
Yeah, happy to. Just want to get the facts out there. And, there's certainly a lot of misperception pertaining to Bitcoin. It's been villainized quite a bit. Bitcoin mining space been villainized quite a bit. And of course, my objective is to clear things up and, not just make Bitcoin mining and Bitcoin sustainable, but take it a whole step further. Let's make it climate positive, and I think the idea, again, of climate positive Bitcoin holdings, this is something that the biggest ESG funds in the world can probably get behind. So yeah, it's really my goal to help out as much as possible and, apply some of my learnings from my career to something that I deeply believe in and think is going to change the world.
100%. And last thoughts, Brad. Can you give the audience, any ways that they can get in contact with you, get in contact with your company, social media, anything like that? Could you please give that to everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Satoshi. So our Twitter handle is @SustainableBTC. Pretty simple, @SustainableBTC. Give us a follow. We tweet a little bit, but again, we've been heads down, just sort of building. I'm of the belief that's better to build than talk about building. So been heads down. And then, of course, if someone wants to get in touch with me, our website is www.sustainablebtc.org, and you can just email us from there. Please reference that you want to chat with me, and we'll get back to you quickly. We love to chat with all stakeholders, of any belief. Doesn't matter whether you are a pure Bitcoiner or you're into other aspects of the crypto ecosystem, or if you're in the renewable energy sector or you're a miner. We're open to speak with every stakeholder. We want to speak with every stakeholder. So please reach out. Again, it's www.sustainablebtc.org.
Brad, once again, thank you for taking time out to speak on the Bitcoin Source. I appreciate the insightful conversation. Thank you.
Dadu, thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to chat, and hopefully before too long we can do this in person and chat a bit more about what we both love, Bitcoin.
Absolutely. Have a good one, Brad.
Cheers. You too, Dadu. Take care.